bridge at Sunset and St. Vrain. We had some road wash away.
We're looking west, by the way. All right, we can continue our route now.
Fly over the bridge at Sunset there. And Boston is now looking at water right up to the top of the bridge. And Boston and St. Vrain. Here, Gay Street, Bowman Street, Price. Just washed away at Sunset.
Well, I first went out in my vehicle after hearing about what was happening in Lyons, Colorado, and I wanted to check the St. Vrain River, which is about a mile from my home. And not making it to the river and seeing the water coming across and headed towards the subdivision that Linda's mom lived in, I called Linda and said she needed to get over to her mom's house as well, and I'd meet her there in a short time. Within probably about 30 minutes, the streets had gone from just being wet from rain to being 5 feet deep of water. We ended up in the middle of the St. Vrain River.
The call came in from Longmont to our operations division as a request for aid for the flooding that was happening in Longmont. And they had a number of residents that were trapped and the water was on the rise, and they had actually sent their water rescue team to Lyons to assist the city over there. So the call came in, and it was a bit of a cry for help in the fact that they didn't really recognize what we had, the potential equipment and the personnel, and they just said, hey, this is what's going on, can you help us? So when we first got our assignment, I think one of the statements that really stood out for me was when the Longmont chief, I asked him what his need was when we got to the station, and he said, this is a mini Katrina for us. And just that statement itself, I was a little struck, and so I asked him, what does that mean to you? And he says, we're doing rooftop rescues, that's why we need your boat. And you know, we've never been in this type of situation. Obviously, this was a really unique flood.
We checked into Station 1 up in Longmont with their incident command system. They gave us a map of where we were going to be going. We had an assignment to help evacuate a neighborhood.
I was standing looking out across the now sunken streets or flooded streets in front of my wife's mom's house, and about 2 blocks away is the Twin Peaks Golf Course. And I saw them getting their boats coming across the golf course in the distance, and they had to get their boats over a fence as well to get to the other side of 9th Avenue to come into the Fairway subdivision.
So as we're going down the street, you see cars that are like makeshift boulders going down a river, and all I remember to my right is seeing people, citizens on their front porch steps or their rooftops looking out their windows, and just I saw their faces because we were turned sideways and almost backwards, and them going like that. And then our boat operator Paul Credo said, grab the paddles, and Chris and I were up front, and I see firefighters to the left, and they were just looking at us with their eyes this big, and I know our eyes were that big until we could maneuver through the cars and down the street to get to Wade Road where we needed to be.
Our insertion there was very much like a commercial rafting experience. I don't think a lot of people were expecting us to take that left turn and head down that turbulent water.
When the first responders arrived, the water was at its highest, and it was just incredible rapids coming down.
The water that we encountered when we first arrived was different than a normal whitewater river situation. What we were experiencing was a lot of man-made objects in the water. So 2 hours before was dry street, and now there's 3.5 feet of rushing water that's moving cars, digging up the irrigation lines. So there's trip hazards underneath there that are hundreds of feet of plastic irrigation lines.
While we were waiting to be rescued, some people that came walking by that were hanging on to light posts outside, and we had to actually have them hold on to the light post until we got an extension ladder out, a 20-foot extension ladder out of Joyce's garage.
You'd be standing in the middle of the street, and all of a sudden something would wrap around your legs and you're in chest-deep water, and it's hundreds of yards of landscape fabric that you're all of a sudden entangled in. When we were walking around, you'd see swirls in the middle of the streets, and those were areas where manhole covers were missing, and that's creating a hazard for us that we can get sucked into. We had no idea a lot of the stuff that was going to be there, that as we ran into barbed wire fences or split rail fences or fire hydrants, that we're like, oh, okay, I guess we better keep our eye open for that from now on. So.
And to see some of the debris that was caught in those fences, everything you can imagine was up against these fences that were acting as strainers. So you got to figure that's all upstream of us somewhere as well, including moving vehicles and trailers that were underwater, just anything.
Sections of 6-foot privacy fence rolling by, right down the middle of the street.
The power of the water was such that the motor in many cases was unusable, and so we'd pull it up and we had our paddles that we were kind of pushing off of and directing and making sure we head down the middle, and there was a lot of people that needed extracting from their homes down there.
It was probably about 15 or 20 minutes by the time they made it down to Joyce's home, and proceeded then in the next 15 or 20 minutes to get her and whatever she needed to take with her, along with my wife, rescued.
Some of the citizens, as these guys were making rescues, said, well, I'm going to stay around because how much worse is it going to get? And one of the statements from firefighters was, well, did you ever expect it to be this bad? You've got a boat in your neighbor's garage, and we're taking people out of here by boat, and there's no other way for these people to get out. But they would just pull up into garages and driveways because they would be given numbers and people would be waving, and they'd pull up and there'd be 3 people there, and then right next door they'd be like, hey, we got 5 more people over here. We've got an 18-month-old baby, a couple toddlers, and a 90-year-old grandmother that's wheelchair bound. We were doing things that we'd never done before with the goal of rescuing these people, and I'd say at a modest pace, we pulled 50 people out of their houses over that expanse of 23 hours.
People are on their porch steps waving to us, telling us, come, are we next, and it was just left and right pulling people out.
And so it was just a consistent barrage of people that needed help. There was never a break, no time to actually sit down and think and develop a plan. It was just on their feet consistently.
The amount of water, the way in which it rose, the rescues, as each one was not the same. Every home was a little different. The problematic situation from someone being able to be, mobile, they can walk themselves, or we're going to have to actually just carry them the whole way. And as the night rolled on, the water just got higher, and cars would move. From the first time we went past them in the street to later, they were further down the street, and by the next morning, one of the trucks had rounded the corner and done a 180.
My memory of seeing the young kids and a mother by herself that we carried out, and the baby crying the whole time. And I remember opening their door and the water just rushing through their house fast enough to where the children would have been swept away in their own house. And they were upstairs when we helped get them out, and thinking what they were going through, and they had dogs. The people that had pets that were trying to bring the kennels, and we just asked them, can you take your dog out of the kennel? We won't all fit in the boat.
At night, one of our more significant rescues that was problematic was a woman who had just had surgery. She had pins in her ankle and a cast, and so we had to keep her out of the water, even on the way to the boat. So we used our boat, our Zodiac boat, and ferried across Hayden Court, and just like a duck would, we ferried upstream and landed in the driveway that we were shooting for. Entered her home, lifted her up, had her on our back, and I took her out, making sure to keep her leg out of the water, and then we were able to walk down 3 houses to where the boat was.
And many people needed a little bit of verbal coercion. As Captain Woodward alluded to, conditions were changing and they could potentially get much worse. We tried to impart that upon them, that we may not be able to get back if you want to go later. Now's a good time, we're here now, and you need to think about leaving. And most of them were very open to that.
Another family I remember going to was a daughter with her 85-year-old diabetic mother, and they thought about staying, but we were worried about obviously medications, being a diabetic, and we talked them into leaving. Just seeing their faces, their basements flooded all the way up until the main level and the devastation we saw, I'll never forget that, and I felt for those people.
We would ferry them up to the engine crew on the high water down the street. And then the engine crew, Longmont engine crew, then would collect them and take them from there. We were just going back and forth from residence to residence. And then the person that didn't want to go a half an hour ago, now they want to go. And so that was, pretty common as well. I remember being very impressed that no one was freaking out. They were all very composed from the experience that I had. And a lot of concern about their pets.
We're coming to do a welfare check on a pony, so we traversed the street with the animal control officer and brought her to the address that was listed, and we were able to locate the pony. And at the time that we did locate the pony, it was having to stick its nose up out of the water. It was hard to get the pony to want to move because they're terrified is really what it was. And so through the instruction of the animal control officer, we were able to utilize a rope behind the pony and kind of scoot it along the gravel road. And we were able to discern where the driveway should be and walk them out on the highest point possible. Once the pony got to about head out of the water level and just up around the chest, then it decided that it was a little bit more comfortable and didn't want to move at all because it was cold and tired and had been struggling for a while. So we were able to coerce it a little bit more to where we got up to a sidewalk and we were able to walk it out of the neighborhood.
There were some other pets that were on single level ranch homes that were up on the furniture to stay out of the water, and so they got attention a little bit sooner. The emotional strength of these residents was really impressive to me. It's a middle-class neighborhood, much like we live in ourselves, and they were losing everything in many cases. A lot of them don't have insurance, and they were looking out for one another.
Linda and her mom had been rescued, and I told the rescuers from Littleton that the neighborhood, there's a lot more elderly, retired people in the area as well as young families. It's a mixture in that neighborhood, and that I would be safe staying in the house, sheltering in place, and they needed to work the rest of the neighborhood and see who needed help.
It was eye-opening just to see, the Mother Nature's power. And Michael Martins, who took photos of us, and we developed a great bond with, spending time in his garage rescuing his mother-in-law and his wife, and then coming back on day 2 rescuing him.
First thing I remember when they arrived was they saw the American flag in front of Larry's home, just 2 doors down, and they go, "This is unbelievable," because we were just yesterday we were remembering 9/11, and today's the 12th. When they came back to get me on Friday, the winds from overnight had kind of tangled Larry's American flag up, and they went over and unfurled it and got it flying again. So
it was the resiliency of the neighborhood and the people that really struck me as they were definitely looking out for each other.
We typically train 3 times a month, and we're in a part of the country that a lot of people don't consider at risk for water injuries or incidents involving water. And this is spoke to as the 100-year flood, so it's something, as Sean was saying, that we may never see again in our career.
But it was one of those situations where once in a while we'd kind of look at each other and go, "This is crazy. This is like, you see that water?"
they're doing their job in the most adverse conditions, and even they didn't know if it was going to be getting worse or whatever, but they were there doing their job and helping everyone in that area get out to safety.
But fortunately, no one lost a life there, and certainly not even down to a pet. All the dogs and cats were safe as well.
Coloradans helping Coloradans out, I think, the way we look at it.
Just an incredible group of professionals, all the way, no doubt about it.